The Crucible of Saints. The world was ash, and Elias Thorne was the one holding the match. He didn't literally burn his world down, of course. God had done that for him. The fire was in his heart, a furious blaze of grief and betrayal that scorched his soul and drove him from the ruins of his life. He spurred his horse, Cinder, harder, the animal's powerful lungs straining as they scrambled up the winding dirt track that led away from the valley. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The image was seared onto the inside of his eyelids, a small, weathered farmhouse standing silent sentinel over two fresh graves, one for his wife, Lydia, taken by a fever that had swept through the Colorado territory like a phantom thief, the other, a much smaller mound of earth, for their son, Samuel, who had followed his mother into the great quiet just 2 weeks later. The drought had taken the crops, the bank had taken the land, the fever had taken his family, and Elias, a man who had lived by the sweat of his brow and the faith in his heart, was left with nothing but a horse, a saddlebag with a half loaf of bread, and a towering, screaming rage directed at the heavens. "Is this your plan?" he roared, his voice raw against the rising wind that whipped through the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. He threw his head back, the rugged, sun-beaten lines of his face contorted in anguish. "Was this the great design, you silent God? To make a man love, to make him build, only to rip it all away? To test him? What kind of test is this? It is cruelty. It is a divine joke." Cinder, a sturdy mare with a coat the color of cooled embers, whinnied nervously, her ears twitching at the fury in her master's voice. She was all he had left of the old world, a living, breathing reminder of a time when his hands were used for planting and building, not for digging graves. He rode without direction, his only goal to put distance between himself and the hollowed-out shell of his existence. The sun began to dip below the jagged peaks, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, colors so beautiful they felt like a personal insult to his suffering. The air grew thin and cold. He pushed Cinder onward, deeper into the unforgiving wilderness, a place as empty and broken as he felt. For 3 days he was a ghost in the wilderness. He drank from icy streams, the cold a welcome shock that momentarily silenced the fire in his gut. He gnawed on his stale bread until it was gone, and then he ate nothing. He was not a hunter. He was a farmer. His skills were in coaxing life from the soil, not taking it from the forest. The irony was a bitter pill. In God's vast green pantry, he was starving. On the 4th day, a freezing rain began to fall. Elias huddled under a rocky overhang, shivering, his clothes soaked through. Cinder stood nearby, her head low, her sides heaving. He had failed her. He had run them into this desolation with no thought for their survival, only for his own pain. "I'm sorry, girl," he whispered, his teeth chattering. "I've brought you here to die with me." He closed his eyes, the anger finally giving way to a profound, soul-crushing despair. This was it, the end of the test, the final cruel punchline. He would die here, cold and alone, his final prayer an accusation. He drifted into a fitful, hypothermic sleep, the last of his strength seeping out of him into the cold, wet earth. He awoke to the smell of smoke and roasting meat. His eyes fluttered open. The rain had stopped. A small, smokeless fire crackled a few feet away, casting a warm, dancing light against the rock face. A rabbit was spitted over the flames, its skin crisp and brown. Cinder was covered with a thick, oiled canvas blanket and was contentedly munching on a small pile of oats on the ground. Sitting on a log by the fire, tending to the meat, was a man. He was old, with a cascade of white hair and a beard that fell to his chest. His face was a road map of wrinkles, but his eyes, a startlingly bright blue, were clear and sharp. He wore the simple, durable clothes of a prospector or a mountain hermit. "You sleep like a man with a heavy conscience," the old man said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He didn't look at Elias, but continued to turn the spit. "Or a man with nothing left to live for. Often they are one and the same." Elias struggled to sit up, his muscles screaming in protest. Who are you?" "A traveler," the old man replied simply. "Same as you, though you seem to be in a greater hurry to reach your destination." He pulled the rabbit from the fire and with a small knife expertly carved off a leg. He held it to Elias. "Eat. Your anger requires fuel, and you've run out." Pride warred with hunger in Elias's belly. The aroma of the cooked meat was maddening. He hadn't realized how close to starvation he was. He took the offered food, his hand trembling. "Thank you." He ate with a desperation that shamed him, tearing the meat from the bone like a wild animal. The old man watched him, his expression unreadable. When he was finished, the man handed him a canteen. The water was clean and cool. "You've been blaming the wrong person," the old man said, finally turning his piercing blue gaze on Elias. He bristled. "And you'd know who the right person is?" "I know it is not the architect of these mountains, nor the one who lit the stars you cursed last night." Elias's shame turned back to anger. "What would you know of my curses? You know nothing of what I've lost." "I know you lost a wife named Lydia, who loved the scent of rain on dry earth, and a son, Samuel, who had your eyes and his mother's laugh. I know you were a good farmer, whose prayers for rain went unanswered while your heart shriveled like your corn." A cold dread washed over Elias, colder than the rain had been. He pushed himself back against the rock wall, his heart hammering in his chest. How could you possibly know that?" The old man smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "The mountains whisper many things to those who listen, and your sorrow, my friend, is not a whisper. It is a scream that echoes from every peak. You came here seeking an escape, but you brought the courthouse with you. You've placed God in the dock and appointed yourself judge, jury, and prosecutor." "He is guilty," Elias spat, the words tearing from his throat, "of neglect, of cruelty." "Is he? Or is a blacksmith cruel for placing iron in the forge? The fire is necessary. The hammer is necessary. It is the only way to shape the metal from a raw, useless lump into a tempered, useful tool." Elias shook his head, bewildered and afraid. "I am no tool. I am a man." "And a man is the most precious of all metals, requiring the most exquisite and often the most painful of forgings. You believe your trials were a punishment. I ask you to consider that they were an invitation." "An invitation to what? To ruin? To madness?" "To strength," the old man said, his voice softening. "To a faith that is not a fragile thing for sunny days, but a fortress for the storm. You had a farmer's faith, Elias. It depended on the sun and the rain. When the weather turned, your faith broke. God is not interested in fair weather faith. He is seeking a different kind of harvest." Elias stared at the strange man, whose words were both infuriating and strangely compelling. He felt as if the world had tilted on its axis.
He had run into the mountains to escape God, only to find him waiting by a campfire, speaking in riddles. "Who are you?" Elias asked again, his voice barely a whisper. The old man stood up, his tall frame silhouetted against the dying fire. "I am a guide. You have begun a journey you do not understand. You have passed the first gate, the gate of utter loss. Now the real test begins. If you want answers, you must walk the path, not away from your pain, but through it." He pointed deeper into the mountains towards a pass that was barely visible between two colossal, snow-dusted peaks. "Your old life is gone. Your old faith is dead. If you want..."
He found a man, a trapper, whose leg was caught in one of his own bear traps. The man was delirious with pain and infection. Elias's first instinct, the instinct of his old wounded self, was to ride on. He had his own burdens. He couldn't take on another's. He owed the world nothing. But as he started to leave, he heard the old man's voice in his mind. "A man is the most precious of all metals." He looked at the trapper, a stranger, and saw not a burden, but a reflection of his own suffering. He saw a man on the brink, just as he had been. With a sigh that seemed to release a year's worth of bitterness, he dismounted. For a week, he nursed the trapper, a grizzled, foul-mouthed man named Jed. He used the last of his own meager medical supplies. He hunted for them both, sharing his kills. He cleaned the wound, fetched water, and listened to the man's fevered ramblings. When Jed was finally strong enough to ride, Elias helped him onto Cinder and walked alongside, leading them for 2 days to a small mining outpost where the man could get proper care. Jed, a man not given to sentiment, simply grunted, "You saved my life, Thorne. I'm in your debt." Elias just shook his head. "No debt. Pass it on." As he walked away from the outpost, back into the solitude of the mountains, he felt a strange lightness in his chest. In helping another, a piece of his own heavy burden had been lifted. He had been given a chance to offer the mercy he felt he had been denied. It was a lesson in compassion. He had been so consumed with what was taken from him that he had forgotten what he had to give. Winter came, blanketing the high peaks in a deep, silent shroud of snow. Elias found a cave to shelter in, and the long, dark months became his final test, the test of stillness. There was no more running, no more striving. There was only the howling of the wind, the crackle of his fire, and the vast, echoing silence of his own heart. In that silence, he was forced to confront his memories head-on. He let himself remember Lydia's smile, the feeling of Samuel's small hand in his. He let the grief wash over him, not as a furious tidal wave, but as a slow, steady rain. He cried for the first time since the funerals, not with anger, but with a deep, sorrowful love. He began to see that his memories were not a curse, but a treasure. God hadn't stolen his family from him. He had given them to him. The time, however brief, was a gift. The pain of their loss was the measure of his love for them. In the heart of that profound pain, he found not an absence, but a presence. They were a part of him, forged into his soul, just as the iron is forged into steel. He began to pray again, not with demands for rain or pleas for healing, but with simple words of gratitude. Thank you for the years I had. Thank you for the love I was given. Thank you for the strength I have found. When spring finally broke the grip of winter, melting the snow and bringing life back to the mountains, Elias Thorne was a new man. The fire of his rage had been banked, transformed into a steady, quiet warmth. The raw metal of his grief had been hammered and shaped into something strong, resilient, and useful. He walked out of the mountains, leading Cinder, and looked down upon the valleys of men.
He saw not a world of random cruelty, but a world of breathtaking beauty and profound suffering, all interwoven. He saw a world full of people, each in their own crucible, each being tested, shaped, and tempered. He did not go back to his old farm. That part of his life was over. He had received his reward, and it wasn't a plot of land or a new family. It was a new heart. It was the wisdom to understand the blacksmith's forge. The path from the mountain's base led Elias not to a familiar pastoral valley, but to the raw, bleeding edge of civilization, a mining town called Silver Creek. It was less a town than more a wound in the earth, a chaotic jumble of raw timber buildings, canvas tents, and muddy tracks gouged into the landscape by the relentless traffic of wagons and mules. The air, which for a year had been clean and sharp with the scent of pine and snow, was now thick with wood smoke, sweat, and the metallic tang of the ore being pulled from the guts of the surrounding hills. After the profound silence of the peaks, the noise was a physical assault. The clang of hammers on anvils, the rumble of ore carts, the shouts of men, the tinny, frantic music spilling from a saloon. It was the sound of humanity's desperate, hungry striving. Elias, leading Cinder through the main thoroughfare, felt like a man from another age. Men looked at him, their eyes lingering on his lean frame, his weather-beaten face, and the strange, unnerving calm in his gaze. He looked like a prospector who had failed, but he walked like a king who owned nothing and everything. He had no plan, only a purpose. He was a physician of the soul, and this town was a hospital filled with patients who didn't know they were sick. They suffered from the fevers of greed, ambition, and the bitter chill of disappointment. He needed only to wait, to listen, and to find the one whose scream of sorrow echoed his own. He found her on his second day. Her name was Sarah. He learned it because her landlord was shouting it for the whole street to hear. She stood on the porch of a small, hastily built cabin, a toddler clutching her skirt and a baby in her arms. She was young, with the kind of beauty that was being rapidly eroded by hardship, like a soft stone in a fast-moving river. Her eyes, however, held no softness. They blazed with a familiar fire. "The company's charity is not my responsibility, Sarah. Your Thomas knew the risks. The rent was due on the 1st. This is the 5th. The company took his life," she shot back, her voice trembling but fierce. "They sent him down a shaft they knew was unsafe. They owe us. They owe you a funeral plot, and they paid for it. My mortgage is not paid with sentiment. You have until sundown tomorrow, then you and your brats are out." The man turned and stomped away, ignoring the muttering of onlookers and the woman's cry of pure, helpless fury. She stood there, her body rigid, staring after him. The toddler began to cry. She shushed him with a rough tenderness, her knuckles white where she gripped the porch railing. Her gaze lifted, sweeping over the indifferent faces in the street, over the town, and up to the impassive blue sky. It was a look Elias knew intimately. It was the look of a prosecutor staring at a silent and absent God. Elias did not approach her then, not then. A person in that state of rage is a fortress. To approach with sympathy is to be met with cannon fire. Instead, he watched. He saw the broken gate on her small patch of yard. He saw the woodpile was nearly empty. He saw the weary slump of her shoulders as she finally herded her children back into the cabin, the door closing with a sound of finality. That afternoon, Elias took the few dollars he had and bought a handful of nails, an axe handle, and a sack of flour. He returned not to the front of Sarah's cabin, but to the alley behind it. He found the old broken axe head lying near the woodpile. With quiet, efficient movements, he fitted the new handle, securing it with a nail. Then he turned his attention to the pile of uncut logs nearby. For the next 2 hours, the only sound from the back of the cabin was the rhythmic, steady thwack of an axe splitting wood. He did not rush. His movements were economical, honed by a farmer's lifetime of labor. He worked through the pile, stacking the split logs neatly against the cabin wall. When he was done, he moved to the front gate, and with the same quiet competence, he repaired the broken hinge so it swung smoothly and latched securely. He left the sack of flour on the porch, knocked once, and then walked away before the door could open. He found a spot at the edge of town where Cinder could graze, and he could watch the cabin. As evening fell, he saw the flicker of a lamp in the window and the faint curl of smoke from the chimney. He had offered no words, no pity. He had simply met a need. He had made a small part of a broken world whole again. The next morning, he was sitting by a small fire, brewing chicory coffee, when she approached. She moved with a wary, defensive posture, her arms crossed over her chest. The fire was gone from her eyes, replaced with a confused exhaustion. She said, "You're the one. The wood, the gate, the flower?" Elias nodded, gesturing to a log opposite him. "Sit. The coffee's not much, but it's hot." She remained standing. "Why?" "The axe needed a handle. The wood needed splitting." "People in Silver Creek don't do things for nothing," she countered, her voice sharp.